They used me and threw me away after 18 years of working for them, but they had no idea I was holding all the cards. I used to believe that loyalty meant something in this world. 18 years of my life. That's what I gave to Skynet Technologies. 18 years of waking up at 5 a.m., brewing that first cup of coffee before the sun even thought about rising, and making it to the office before anyone else. Hell, I knew the janitor's life story better than I knew some of my co-workers, because we were the only ones there at that ungodly hour. Every morning, I'd punch in, grab that terrible coffee from the ancient vending machine in the break room, the one that made a noise like a dying cat whenever someone pressed a button for black coffee, and head to my station. That machine survived 3 office renovations. Sometimes I think it was the only thing in that place older than my tenure. I was the guy who fixed everything. Network down? Call John. Server acting up? John's your man. CEO can't figure out how to open a PDF? Yeah, that's somehow IT's problem too. For 18 years, I was their digital janitor, cleaning up messes and making sure the company's technological heart kept beating. And for what? So I could miss my son Tommy's baseball games? So my daughter Emma could stop asking me to help with her science projects because Dad's always working? So my wife could get used to eating dinner alone 4 nights a week? I remember the day Tommy hit his first home run. I wasn't there. I was troubleshooting a server crash because some executive decided to download God knows what from a sketchy website. My wife sent me a video, and I watched it in the server room, alone, with the humming machines as my only company. I told myself it was worth it, that I was building something for them. For us. The irony is that I was building something, just not for us. I was building their empire, brick by digital brick. While the executives flew to Aspen for strategy retreats, I was the one making sure their emails got delivered and their precious quarterly reports looked pretty for the shareholders. Last Christmas, they gave me a plaque for outstanding dedication and service. The same mass-produced plaque they gave to Susan from accounting and Mike from sales. 18 years, and I got the same recognition as a guy who'd been there for 18 months. But I swallowed my pride and hung it in my cubicle anyway, right next to my family photo. A photo that was 5 years outdated because I couldn't find the time to schedule a new one. Then came that Tuesday. Nothing special about it. Just another Tuesday in May. The weather was nice. I remember that. One of those perfect spring days where the temperature is just right. I was troubleshooting a network issue when my phone rang. It was Patricia from HR asking if I could pop by Mr. Peterson's office. Now, I hadn't been in the big boss's office in maybe 3 years. We weren't exactly grabbing beers after work. So immediately my stomach dropped. You know that feeling, right? When you just know something bad is coming, but you have to walk toward it anyway. The walk to his office felt like walking to the electric chair. Every step down that carpeted hallway was heavier than the last. Peterson's assistant, some young kid who looked like he belonged in a boy band, barely looked up when I arrived. "Go right in," he said, like he was sending me to my execution. Peterson was sitting behind his mahogany desk, the one that probably cost more than my car, staring at his computer screen. He didn't even look up when I entered. Just motioned for me to sit down without taking his eyes off whatever was so important on that screen. Probably his fantasy football lineup. "John," he finally said, still not making eye contact. "I'll cut to the chase. We're streamlining operations and your position has been reevaluated. Reevaluated. Like I was a bad investment they were cutting loose. 18 years of my life, reevaluated in a 10-minute meeting. The company is moving in a new direction," he continued, finally looking at me with all the emotion of someone ordering a coffee. "We're outsourcing most of IT to a firm in India. More cost-effective. Cost-effective. That's what I was reduced to, a line item on a budget spreadsheet. Not a person who had dedicated nearly 2 decades of his life to this company. Not a guy who misses kids growing up so this place could function. Just an expense to be cut. Your severance package is outlined in these documents," he said, sliding a folder across that fancy desk. 2 weeks for every year of service. HR will walk you through the details. As if that made it okay. as if money could make up for the fact that they were throwing me away like yesterday's newspaper. "Any questions?" he asked, already turning back to his screen. I had about 1,000 questions. Like, how do you sleep at night? Like, did you ever actually know what I did here? Like, do you realize I'm the reason your emails haven't ended up in Russia for the past 18 years? But I just sat there, silent. What was I supposed to say? Please don't fire me? I have a mortgage? My daughter's starting college next year? I just shook my head, took the folder, and walked out. Patricia from HR was waiting outside. She had the nerve to look sympathetic, as if she hadn't known this was coming for weeks. She led me to her office, sat me down, and spoke to me like I was a child, explaining my transition package and how they generously let me keep my health insurance for 3 months. 3 months. Like I could find another decent job at 53 in an industry that worships youth and novelty. She handed me a box of my personal items and told me I had an hour to clear out my desk, an hour to pack up 18 years. Generous. The walk back to my cubicle was surreal. People watched me go by, that empty cardboard box in my hands like a neon sign announcing my new status. Some looked away quickly. Others gave me those tight, uncomfortable smiles, the kind you give at funerals when you don't know what to say. Marfin's security team, a guy I'd helped countless times, a guy whose kids I knew by name, suddenly became very interested in his shoelaces when I passed by. Cowards, all of them, afraid they'd be next if they showed any solidarity. Cleaning out my desk didn't take long. That's the sad part. 18 years in place, and all I had to show for it was a family photo, some tech magazines, a coffee mug my daughter made in 3rd grade, and a dusty baseball glove I kept promising to use when Tommy asked me to play catch. A promise I broke so many times it eventually stopped being made. I remember staring at that glove, running my fingers over the worn leather. I bought it 5 years ago, after missing yet another Tommy's games. A peace offering. Next weekend, champ. I promised. But next weekend became next month, became next summer, became never. The elevator ride down to the lobby was the longest minute of my life. I stood there, holding that pathetic box of memories, surrounded by people who suddenly found the elevator buttons fascinating. Some of these people I'd had lunch with hundreds of times. Some I'd helped move into new homes or celebrated birthdays with. Now, they couldn't even look me in the eye. In that moment, I realized I didn't have colleagues or work friends. I had people who tolerated me because I was useful to them. The second I wasn't, I became invisible. As I walked through the lobby, past the security desk where Bob gave me an awkward nod, no longer checking my badge because, well, they'd already taken that, a strange feeling washed over me. Not sadness, not even anger, though that would come later. It was a feeling of emptiness, like I'd been hollowed out. The sunshine hit me as I pushed through the revolving doors. It was still that perfect spring day. Birds were singing. People were walking their dogs in the park across the street. The world had continued spinning while mine had stopped. I stood in the parking lot, staring up at the gleaming tower of glass and steel where I'd spent most of my adult life. 42 floors of corporate greed and backstabbing, all wrapped up in mission statements about innovation and family values. What a joke. My car was sitting there. Same as always, that trusty Honda that had seen better days. I'd been meaning to upgrade for years, but there was always something more important. Tommy's braces, Emma's laptop for school, the roof repair after that storm. Always something. I put my box of belongings in the trunk and just sat in the driver's seat, keys in hand, not starting the engine. What was I supposed to do now? Go home and tell my wife I'd been fired? Tell my kids their college funds were in jeopardy? Tell myself that 18 years of loyalty meant nothing? That's when something inside me shifted like a gear falling into place. I remembered something important that they'd forgotten, something that had seemed insignificant at the time. But now it felt like a lifeline, or maybe a weapon. My old coach used to say, it's not about how hard you get hit. It's about what you do when you get back up. For years, I thought that was just some motivational nonsense he spouted to get us to run another lap. But sitting there in that parking lot, I finally understood. They thought they'd knock me down for good. They thought that boxed-up John Franklin would go quietly into the night, maybe find some help desk job somewhere, fade into obscurity like all the other middle-aged tech guys they discarded over the years. But they had made one critical mistake. They forgot what I knew. They forgot where I'd been. They forgot that for 18 years, I was the invisible man who kept their secrets running, the guy who fixed their mistakes and covered their tracks, the digital ghost in their machine. As I finally started my car, a small smile spread across my face. They thought this was the end of my story. They had no idea it was just the beginning, because I knew something they didn't know I knew, and that was going to change everything. That afternoon, driving home from Skynet Technologies for what I thought would be the last time, my mind was racing faster than a NASCAR driver on the final lap. The sun was still shining in that perfect spring sky, mocking my dark mood. What was I going to tell my wife? How would I face my kids? But beneath all that worry was something else, something that felt a lot like opportunity. You see, when you spend 18 years in a company's server rooms, you become a ghost. Executives walk right past you in the hallway without a second glance. People have entire conversations like you're not even there. It's like wearing an invisibility cloak. Except instead of being magical, it's just that nobody thinks the IT guy is worth acknowledging. Their mistake. Because ghosts see things. Ghosts hear things. And this particular ghost had access to every digital corner of Skynet Technologies. I remember exactly when I first noticed something wasn't right. It was about 5 years ago, during the Henderson Project, a government contract worth millions that had the executives strutting around like peacocks. I was doing routine maintenance, making sure the project data was properly backed up, when I spotted some unusual transfers in the financial database. Now, I'm no accountant. Numbers were never my strong suit. Just ask my high school math teacher, Mr. Petrelli, who once suggested I consider careers that don't involve calculation. But even I could tell something was off when I saw millions of dollars being siphoned off to a company called Starbright Consulting. At first, I thought it was just some vendor I hadn't heard of. Skynet had hundreds of contractors and partners. But something about it nagged at me. Maybe because the transfers always happen at odd hours, or maybe because the amounts were always just under the threshold that would trigger additional review. So I did a little digging. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't exactly planning to be some corporate whistleblower. I just looked up Starbright Consulting in our vendor database. It wasn't there. I checked our contract repository. Nothing. Now that was strange. Skynet had stricter paperwork requirements than the DMV. You couldn't order a box of paper clips without 3 forms and a manager's signature. But here was a company receiving millions with no documentation. I should have reported it then and there. Should have walked straight to internal audit and laid it all out. But I didn't. Why? Self-preservation, I guess. My Uncle Joe, the smartest man I ever knew despite never finishing high school, always told me, when you smell something rotten, check the garbage before you tell anyone it stinks. His way of saying gather evidence before making accusations, especially against people with corner offices. So I kept quiet and kept watching. Every few months, like clockwork, more money would flow to Starbright Consulting, always from our biggest, most profitable projects, always just under the radar. I started keeping copies of the transactions, just simple screenshots stored on an encrypted drive I kept in my desk drawer, not because I was planning anything, but because, well, I don't really know why. Insurance, maybe? My own little digital security blanket. The transfers continued for years. The amounts grew larger as Skynet landed bigger contracts. And still, no one noticed. Or if they did, they weren't saying anything. Meanwhile, the company cut the holiday bonus program due to budget constraints and switched to cheaper health insurance that cost employees more out of pocket. I watched coworkers get laid off in necessary cost-cutting measures, while invisible millions flowed to a ghost company. It made my blood boil, but what could I do? I had a mortgage, college tuition looming on the horizon, a wife who'd already sacrificed enough because of my dedication to a company that clearly didn't give a damn about its people. Then came the Johnson account, our biggest client yet, a defense contractor with deep government connections. The project was supposed to secure Skynet's future for the next decade. Peterson, the CEO, had called an all-hands meeting to announce it, standing there in his $1,000 suit talking about team effort and shared success, while the rest of us wondered if this meant we might actually get cost of living raises this year. 3 weeks later, I saw the first Starbright transfer from the Johnson account, bigger than any before it, 8 figures. That night, I stayed late at the office. Everyone thought I was working overtime to set up the new servers for the Johnson project, but I had other plans. With the building nearly empty, I dug deeper into Starbright Consulting than I ever had before. I'm not some hacker from a movie, typing furiously while techno music plays in the background. But I know my way around corporate systems better than almost anyone, and I had admin access to practically everything. So I followed the digital breadcrumbs. What I found nearly made me fall out of my chair. Starbright Consulting had been incorporated 5 years ago in the Cayman Islands. Its listed officers were all shell companies, but buried in a forgotten corner of Peterson's personal drive, which he shouldn't have been using for company business in the first place, I found a document, an original operating agreement for Starbright Consulting. The signatories? Peterson himself. The CFO, Richards, and our board chairman, Williams. They were embezzling millions from their own company, from government contracts, from clients who trusted them, and they were doing it right under everyone's noses, including mine, until I started paying attention. I sat in that dark server room at 2 a.m., the only light coming from my monitor, and tried to process what I'd found. This wasn't just some accounting trick or gray area tax scheme. This was fraud, plain and simple, the kind that sends people to federal prison. My hands were shaking as I copied every file I could find related to Starbright. Emails, transfer records, corporate documents, the works. I saved it all to that encrypted drive, then made another copy to a cloud account I created that night using a VPN and a prepaid credit card. Paranoid? Maybe. But when you stumbled onto a multi-million-dollar fraud run by the people who sign your paychecks, a little paranoia seems reasonable. As I was finishing up, a janitor walked in and nearly gave me a heart attack. Manuel had been cleaning the Skynet offices for longer than I'd worked there. He just nodded at me, used to finding the IT guy working at odd hours. "Working late again, Mr. John?" he asked in his heavily accented English. I nodded, trying to look casual while closing windows on my screen. "You work too hard," he said, moving on to empty the trash cans. "They don't pay enough for such dedication." If he only knew how right he was. I drove home that night with a strange feeling in my chest. Part fear, part anger, part something else. Power, maybe? For the first time in 18 years, I held something over Skynet instead of the other way around. But what was I supposed to do with this information? Go to the police? The FBI? The media? I had a family to think about. Peterson and his cronies had resources, connections. They could make my life hell even if I managed to expose them. So I sat on it, kept going to work, kept fixing their computers and maintaining their servers and pretending I didn't know their dirty secrets. Kept watching the money flow to Starbright Consulting while the company cried poverty to its employees. Then came that Tuesday, the day they decided I was expendable, the day they handed me a cardboard box and expected me to disappear quietly. They had no idea what I was taking with me when I walked out that door. That night, after breaking the news to my wife, who took it better than expected, actually, she'd been telling me for years that Skynet didn't deserve my loyalty, I went down to our basement, my man cave, though it was less cave and more cluttered office, where I occasionally got to watch football if no one needed the TV upstairs. I pulled out the encrypted drive from my backpack and plugged it into my personal laptop. Everything was still there. All the evidence, all the transactions, all the proof that the people would just throw me away like garbage were criminals. As I scrolled through files, a quote from my grandfather came to mind. He was a judge back in Pittsburgh for 30 years, and he always said, "The truth isn't what you see on the surface. It's what you have the courage to dig up and the integrity to reveal." I hadn't had the courage before, but getting fired has a way of changing your perspective. I spent the next 3 days organizing the evidence, creating a timeline, writing out explanations for the non-technical aspects. My wife thought I was job hunting. In a way, I guess I was just not for the kind of job she imagined. By Friday, I had everything in order. A complete record of 5 years of systematic fraud by Skynet's top executives. Dates, amounts, account numbers, corporate documents. Even some emails where they discuss a scheme in thinly veiled terms. It was all there. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. I considered my options while shooting baskets in the driveway with Tommy. Something I should have done years ago, but always found an excuse to put off. He was better than I expected. Turns out he'd been practicing on his own all those weekends I was at the office. "You're pretty good, kid," I said after he sank his third three-pointer in a row. He shrugged, trying to look cool but clearly pleased. "Coach says I could start next season if I keep working at it." "I'll be at your games. I promised. All of them." He looked skeptical, and I couldn't blame him. How many times had he heard that before? For real this time. I added, "No more excuses." As we played, I thought about the future. About what would happen to our family if I went public with what I knew. About what would happen if I didn't. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in my basement office, staring at my laptop screen. I had drafted 3 emails. One to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. One to a reporter at the Washington Post who specialized in corporate fraud stories. And one to Skynet's board directors, the ones who weren't involved in the scheme. My finger hovered over the send button for each one, but I couldn't make myself click. Once I did, there would be no going back. Our lives would change forever, for better or worse. My wife came downstairs around midnight with 2 beers. She handed me one and sat in the old armchair we kept meaning to replace. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" she asked. "Because I know you're not spending 12 hours a day applying for IT jobs." So I told her everything, the fraud, the evidence, the emails ready to send, the potential consequences. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the one question I hadn't been able to answer myself. "What do you want to happen, John?" What did I want? Revenge? Justice? A settlement that would let us retire early? To see Peterson and his cronies in handcuffs? To just move on with my life? "I want them to face consequences," I finally said, "but I don't want our family to pay the price." She nodded, understanding the dilemma. "So find a way to make that happen." That's when it hit me. There was a 4th option I hadn't considered. A way to make them face consequences, while minimizing the risk to our family. A way to use what I knew as leverage rather than just a weapon. I stayed up until 3 a.m. working out the details, the plan taking shape like a puzzle assembling itself in my mind. By the time I finally went to bed, I was smiling for the first time since that Tuesday in Peterson's office. They thought they'd thrown me away, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd forgotten I was the ghost in their machine, the invisible man who saw everything. And now, the invisible man was about to become very, very visible. The weekend after discovering exactly what I had in my possession, I sat in my car in the driveway for nearly an hour. The radio was playing those 90s hits that always take me back. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, the songs that were popular when life seemed simpler, when I still believed that hard work and loyalty meant something. My wife had taken the kids to her sister's place of the day, giving me space to think. The windows were down, letting in that perfect late spring breeze as Smells Like Teen Spirit played softly in the background. The irony wasn't lost on me, a song about rebellion, while I contemplated my own small revolution. I had 3 options in front of me. 1, do nothing. Move on, find another IT job, and pretend I never saw anything. The safe choice. 2, go nuclear. Send everything to the FBI, the SEC, and every major newspaper in the country. Watch Skynet burn to the ground while I testified in federal court. 3, something in between. Something smarter. I've never been the revenge type. My dad, a factory worker who never missed a day in 30 years, always told me, "Son, vengeance is just anger wearing a fancy suit. It costs more than it's worth." He was right, as usual. This wasn't about bringing Skynet down or watching Peterson get hauled away in handcuffs, satisfying as that might be. This was about justice, not just for me, but for every employee who'd been denied raises while executives siphoned millions into offshore accounts, for every shareholder who'd been lied to, for every client who'd been defrauded. But justice doesn't always have to arrive with sirens blaring. Sometimes it works better when it comes in quietly through the back door. I spent Monday morning creating a new email account using a VPN. Nothing that could be traced back to me easily. Then I drafted a simple, direct message. To the board of directors, I have evidence of systematic fraud by CEO Peterson, CFO Richards, and Chairman Williams involving a shell company called Starbright Consulting. Attached is a sample. There's much more. I'll be contacting federal authorities in 48 hours unless I hear from a non-involved board member. I attached just enough evidence to be convincing. A few transaction records, the Starbright Incorporation documents, one damning email, but held back the most explosive material. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The first response came within 3 hours, from board member Eleanor Winters. I'd fixed her laptop, once when it crashed during a board meeting. She'd been the only one who bothered to learn my name. She wanted to meet, privately. No lawyers yet. That was interesting. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in a neighboring town, neutral ground where we wouldn't run into any Skynet employees. I arrived early, claimed a table in the back corner, and watched her walk in precisely on time. Eleanor Winters was in her 60s, with the kind of steel gray hair and perfect posture that screamed old money in boarding schools. She'd made her fortune in pharmaceuticals before retiring to serve on various corporate boards. Unlike most of the Skynet leadership, she had a reputation for her actual integrity. She sat down across from me without ordering anything. No pleasantries, no small talk. "Show me everything," she said, placing a legal pad on the table. I connected my laptop to the coffee shop's Wi-Fi through my VPN and walked her through it all. The transactions, the offshore accounts, the fake consulting firm, the emails discussing how to hide it all. 5 years of systematic fraud, laid out in spreadsheets and PDF files. Her expression never changed, but her knuckles went white around her pen as she took occasional notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, why come to me with this? Why not go straight to the authorities? It was a fair question. Because I worked at Skynet for 18 years, I answered. There are good people there. People who had nothing to do with this. If this explodes into a public scandal, they lose their jobs too. She studied me, probably trying to figure out my angle. And what do you want? Now came the tricky part. I want justice, I said simply. But I'm not looking to burn everything down. And I'm not looking for a payout to keep quiet. That's not who I am. She raised an eyebrow. Everyone wants something, Mr. Franklin. I nodded. Fair enough. I want the people responsible held accountable. I want the company to survive for the sake of the employees. And I want my job back, but not my old job. I explained my proposal. Peterson, Richards, and Williams would resign for personal reasons. No public scandal, no perp walks, but they'd be gone. The board would quietly report the issue to the SEC and make full restitution. And I would return as the new chief of information security, a position I'd argued was necessary for years. She almost smiled. You've thought this through. I've had nothing but time lately. We talked for another hour, revising the plan. Eleanor might have looked like someone's genteel grandmother, but she had a tactical mind that would have impressed General Patton. By the time we finished our third coffee, we had an agreement. She would take my evidence to 3 other board members she trusted. If they agreed with her assessment, they would confront Peterson and the others with an ultimatum. Resign quietly or face federal prosecution. I'd get my answer within 48 hours. Those 2 days were the longest of my life. I jumped every time my phone rang. My wife kept asking if I was feeling okay, probably wondering if the stress of unemployment was making me ill. I tried to distract myself by helping Tommy with his science project, a solar system model that apparently needed to be much more accurate than the one I'd made with styrofoam balls back in my day. But my mind kept drifting to that meeting. to the evidence, to what might happen if Peterson decided to fight back. On Wednesday morning, exactly 48 hours after our meeting, my phone rang. Unknown number. "It's done," Eleanor said when I answered. "The board met an emergency session last night. Peterson, Richards, and Williams have been confronted with the evidence. They've agreed to resign, effective immediately." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for days. And the authorities? Our outside counsel is already in contact with the SEC to self-report. There will be fines, certainly, but with full cooperation and restitution, the company should survive. And the other part? I asked, hardly daring to hope. "The board would like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss a new position overseeing information security, with appropriate compensation, of course." I thanked her and hung up, feeling strangely numb. It had worked. Actually worked. Part of me had been convinced that somehow Peterson would wriggle out of it, that power and money always win in the end. But not this time. I turned on the TV that evening to find Peterson's resignation already making the business news. The official story was that he was stepping down to pursue other opportunities, the corporate equivalent of spending more time with family. The stock had taken a hit, but nothing catastrophic. The company would survive. The phone calls started coming in that night. First, Peterson's secretary, the one who couldn't look me in the eye on my last day, wondering if I knew what was happening. Then Mark from security, fishing for information. I played dumb with all of them. Let the board tell whatever story they wanted. The meeting the next day was surreal. The same boardroom where I'd once set up presentations, as the invisible IT guy now had a chair waiting for me at the table. Several board members I'd never met in person greeted me by name, as if we were old friends. Eleanor gave me a single nod from the head of the table, acknowledgement of a game well played. They offered me the position, Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to the board, with a salary that made my previous one look like pocket change, plus stock options, a seat at the leadership table, and a budget to build my own department. "We've realized," one board member said without a trace of irony, "that information security should be one of our highest priorities." I just nodded, keeping my face professionally neutral. No point in saying I've been telling them that for years. The lawyers came in next, with papers for me to sign. Non-disclosure agreements about the circumstances of my departure and return. Paperwork to officially rescind my termination, making it as if I'd never left. Documents outlining the terms of my new position. I read every word before signing. I wasn't making that mistake again. Walking back through the Skynet doors on Monday morning felt like entering a parallel universe. The security guard who'd awkwardly taken my badge 2 weeks earlier now jumped up to congratulate me on my promotion. People who'd formerly hurried past me in the hallway now stopped to introduce themselves. My new office, Peterson's old one, had been quickly redecorated, the mahogany desk replaced with something more modern. The first email in my new inbox was a company-wide announcement about the leadership transition and my new role. The second was from Eleanor. "Well played. Don't waste this opportunity." I didn't intend to. My first act as CISO was to review every system, every access point, every potential vulnerability, both technical and human. I hired a team of security specialists, people who thought like I did but with fresher training. We implemented protocols that should have been in place years ago. My second act was to look into those who had been laid off in recent years. Many were brought back, with appropriate apologies disguised as organizational restructuring. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. The news about Starbright Consulting never went public. The SEC investigation remained confidential, with Skynet paying a substantial fine and making full restitution to defrauded clients. Peterson, Richards, and Williams disappeared from the business world, likely living off their still substantial legitimate wealth, somewhere with white beaches and no extradition treaties. Some might say they got off too easy. Maybe they did, but the company survived. Thousands of innocent employees kept their jobs. And I got something better than revenge. I got vindication. As my father used to say, quoting someone much wiser, "Justice is a sword you use to cut others down. It's a mirror that shows everyone, including yourself, who you truly are. A month after my return, I was working late. Old habits die hard. When Bob from security called up, "There's someone here to see you, sir." Says he's an old colleague. It was Manuel, the janitor who'd found me that night in the server room. He stood awkwardly in my office doorway, still in his uniform, looking around the expansive space with wide eyes. "Mr. John," he said with a smile, "I heard about your promotion. Very good, very deserved." I thanked him and asked what I could do for him. "My nephew," he said hesitantly. "He studies computers at community college. Very smart boy. I wonder, maybe you have internship for him this summer?" 20 minutes later, Manuel left with an application form and my personal promise to review his nephew's resume. As I watched him go, I thought about how many manuals there were at Skynet, hard-working, invisible people who kept everything running while the executives took all the credit and money. That was going to change. I was going to make sure of it. The next weekend, I was where I should have been all along, at Tommy's baseball game, cheering from the bleachers as he took the field. He kept glancing over, maybe still not quite believing I was actually there. Emma sat beside me, alternating between watching her brother and showing me her latest art project on her tablet. My wife leaned against my shoulder, more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "You seem different," she said quietly. "Happier." She was right. I was different, not just because of the promotion or the vindication, but because I'd finally learned what actually mattered. And it wasn't a corner office or a fancy title. When Tommy hit a double in the 7th inning, the smile on his face as he looked toward the stands was worth more than all the stock options in the world. I'd missed too many of those moments. I wasn't going to miss any more.